pops up on the screen saying recording about to start. Great, thank you. Welcome everyone to May 2021's Bassetlaw CCG governing body. It's a very special day today. It's Lindsay Blakelock's birthday. Happy birthday, Linz.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Lindsay.
Thank you very much.
So, welcome everyone. Kumar, I thought we had your apologies, but you've changed your mind.
I don't remember giving apology, to be honest. It may be for the next governing body or something like that. But
no, it's Mr. Kumar that sent us apologies, not Doctor. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I apologise. Sorry. Mr. Kumar sent his apologies, as well as Victoria McGregor Riley and Louise Lester. Before we get started, we've got a little video to play, which has come from the transitions team, Sam. Perfect. Are you ready to go, Linz?
So this is a video that was co-created in the transitions group headed up by Cathy, and we involved the Bassetlaw Youth Council in ideas and what it should include. So it's quite a joint piece of work.
Thank you.
We've not got any volume on this, Lindsay.
normally when you share screen, we don't get volume, I think.
You can share sound as well. There's usually a separate button you have to press to share computer sound.
Let me try again. Sorry.
That's right.
That better?
No, we still can't hear anything.
No, I can't hear.
Lindsay, where you go on to share content, there's a button next to the thing that says include computer sound. I think you need to click on that.
Ah, right. Yes, I see it.
I see it.
Yeah. Again, thank you.
In health stuff.
Hey you, how's things?
It's alright. Wish I didn't have to rely on you and Mum all the time to take me to my clinic appointments.
Enjoy it whilst it lasts. Wait till you're 18 like me. You'll probably be doing all this health stuff yourself.
Well, I can't wait till I can drive. Anyway, what do you mean health stuff?
When you're 18, you're legally an adult. That means you're going to adult health services, and that means changes. Changes to where you go, changes to who you see. No more Dr. Russell. Changes and transitions. Haven't you got a transition plan?
Dunno. Don't think so. Anyway, it's ages before I turn 18. Why are you going on about it now?
Because it's important. And yes, you do have plenty of time before you're 18. But maybe at least ask Dr. Russell about a transition plan when you get to the clinic. You should know what will happen to your services.
Alright, I will. If it will stop you going on about it.
Hey, I'm trying to help.
Okay.
And I'm going on about it because your transition should really start now.
What do you mean start now?
There's lots of ways you can take control of managing your health condition before you reach 18. I remember when I first started high school.
Ugh, here we go. Not another lecture. You're as bad as Mum.
Hey, listen, this really helped me, and I'm trying to help you.
Sorry. Go on then.
The first change was with my meds. No more Mrs. Logan looking after them and dishing them out to me like in junior school. I had to put my meds on me, and it was up to me to remember to take them. Obviously, I forgot a few times.
Really? What happened when you missed them?
Luckily, not a lot. I made sure I knew all about them, side effects, what to do when you miss a dose. That's one thing you can do. Learn all about your meds, and you're already starting to take control.
Yeah, I know quite a lot about my meds. Been on them most of my life.
I suppose you know all about your health condition too?
Of course. Well, sort of. I looked it up on the web, but there was loads of stuff that was confusing. And it started to freak me out, so I stopped.
Yeah, well, don't believe everything you read online. You can get yourself into a right mess if you're not careful. I always talked to Dr. Yates at the clinic. Gave me loads of top places to get info. Official websites, organisations, even help groups. And when you know about your condition, it will give you more control over it and makes it easier to answer any questions that your new friends might ask.
I haven't told anyone. Well, Mia and Aidan know, but no one else.
It's up to you who you tell. Good friends help each other out. They're like family. So it's good to be able to tell them all about your condition. And you never know. Even you might make some new friends. Anything's possible.
Ah, very funny.
And new friends means new opportunities for fun. Parties, gigs, hanging around the park, drinking, smoking.
Drinking? Smoking? No way! I'm not that stupid. Is that what you did?
No, I'm not saying I did, or that you will either. It's about weighing up risks. If you have a good understanding of your condition and your meds, then you can take control and decide what sounds like a good idea and what should be avoided.
Suppose. Would be good to go to some gigs.
Exactly. Anyway, we're almost here. Do you want me to come in with you as usual?
Do I have a choice?
Of course. It's your right. You don't have to be 18 to see the doctor on your own. I used to see Dr. Yates on my own sometimes. It helped show Mum I was growing up, finding my independence. You know, taking control.
Didn't she mind?
Well, she wasn't keen at first, but she got used to it. And she still gave me a lift to the clinic when I missed the bus.
Well, maybe next time. I'll talk to Mum about it later.
Okay, let's go and see Dr. Russell. I'm glad you asked about your transition plan. It seems like they have things under control. Do you understand what Dr. Russell said about your transition process?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think I'm going to start taking more control. Do some of those things you mentioned, because I've got plans for when I get older. First off, I'm going to learn to drive. Then uni, living away from home, and then some proper travelling. I'm taking control.
You can find out more about the transition into adult services from this booklet.
That was really good, Sam.
So there's going to be an official launch of it, and it's been shared across with SYB partners as well. So it's about something a bit fun and quirky for children to start to think about preparing for adulthood and giving them the information.
It's really good.
Well, thank you, Sam. And can you thank Kathy on our behalf?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, well done, team.
Thank you. So getting back to the agenda, Sarah, saw your email yesterday. We've got no questions from members of the public. Anything coming overnight?
No more questions, no.
Okay. Any changes to declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, so we'll move swiftly on to minutes of, I think it was our March meeting. Just let me get the screen up.
It was March and April, Eric.
Yeah, it was a small April one. March 16th minutes. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and briefly page 10. Anything? Nope. And then on to 20th of April. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Nothing. Okay, thank you. Action log. First item is just been kept on, so don't forget it. Items 2 and 3 have been deferred. Nottinghamshire Best Start Strategy. Number of comments were raised. Did you manage to feed them back, Idris?
Yeah, I had a meeting with Nottinghamshire colleagues last week where I raised them. This paper, the document, the strategy, has already gone to Health and Wellbeing Board, so they may not make sort of the final version because I think that's already gone through. But the points that we raised will be taken on board about how it's taken forward. So it was a useful discussion.
Thank you, Idris. Moving on to Chair's report. Rather than sort of concentrating on COVID, which we seem to have done a lot, I just wanted to actually sort of remind everyone that, which I'm sure no one needs reminding, that the CCG continues to function as business as usual, as best it can. Despite COVID and despite the NHS white paper and likely changes to CCGs, if ever the white paper has its first and second reading, which I believe has been deferred a wee bit, and Idris will no doubt comment on that later. Actually, the CCG continues to do what it does, which is deliver for the population of Bassetlaw. I believe, Hayley, that you and your team have ticked all the financial boxes yet again, despite everything. So well done to everyone in the team. Nicola, you and your team continue to deliver across a multitude of areas. So again, well done, particularly around the LD figures, which are excellent as ever. So actually, and Andrew and the primary care team delivers, and so does everyone else. So I just wanted to actually just remind people that as a small CCG, despite everything, and despite the uncertainty ahead, whether we will be north or south, or part of a northern system or a southern system, actually we carry on delivering week after week. So well done to everyone there. Well done again to primary care colleagues. We've seen the latest SOP that's come out from NHS England, but I'm pleased to say in Bassetlaw, practices have largely been open for business as usual. Practices with more than one site have had all the sites open for business, and as a local primary care resource, we over the whole of COVID, we have seen patients face to face. they may have a telephone call first, but if they require a face-to-face appointment, that has happened. So again, well done to all of primary care for delivering and again for continuing to deliver the COVID vaccination programme. I'll hand over to you now, Idris.
Thank you, Eric. Similar to Eric, there's some of the things in my update are covered later on in the agenda in more detail, so I won't go into vaccinations and sort of COVID rates at this point. But I do point out in my briefing that 248 Bassetlaw residents tragically have lost their lives over the period of the pandemic so far. And I just wanted to make a sort of formal note and record of that, to recognise that despite the fantastic achievements, then there are still sort of tragedies that have happened, and I just wanted to make some notes of that. I also make mention of the £4 million that we have pledged to invest in mental health services. That's in line with the Mental Health Investment Standard, and we've already made significant investments into a range of services, including into a number of community and voluntary sector services, and some of those were selected for grants with the support of local residents who have lived experience in particular areas, for example, with suicide and with depression. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to put funding directly into communities to support them and through the community voluntary service. So that's in addition, to the more formal services that are provided primarily through Nottinghamshire Healthcare. In terms of recovery of services, Eric's just made mention of primary care, and obviously primary care is extremely busy. In secondary care, they are trying to recover the elective backlog that's been created by not being able to carry out as many procedures as we would normally over the last year due to COVID. And part of that is people needing to come forward if they have sort of concerning symptoms. And I'm very pleased to say that the 2-week wait referral levels now match for the previous year. So, they had really fallen off during the first wave of COVID, but they have sort of climbed back up again. But we do have quite a significant elective backlog, more people waiting over 52 weeks than I care to remember since that was at similar levels. They are making inroads to that, and I'm pleased to say that the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw system are one of 13 that have been selected across the country to become accelerator systems, which basically means we get a fairly significant investment to support both infrastructure and wider support services to increase activity. And that's alongside the National Elective Recovery Fund, which will give 120% of tariff if the activity can get above 85% of the previous year's levels, so pre-COVID. So that is really helpful investment. Obviously, some of the challenges that we have in terms of PPE, social distancing and so on still remain, and it's not going to be sort of an overnight fix, but as the months come through now, we will expect to see sort of increasing levels of activity. And our aspiration as a system is to get that to be over 100% of the pre-COVID activity, and potentially up to 120% of that pre-COVID activity. So that's a significant ambition. It's a very challenging one, but we will be all working together as a system to try and achieve that. On the integrated care systems, Eric made mention of the fact that we still haven't had a final decision in terms of whether we will remain in the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw system or move into the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire system. I'm expecting that decision next month, and we're working closely with both systems to ensure that whatever the answer is, that we will have a smooth transition into the new arrangements that will formally come in place, subject to the bill passing through the Houses of Parliament smoothly, that will come in place on the 1st of April next financial year. And finally, not on my briefing, but I just wanted to mention the annual CCG assessment process has begun. So this is the assessment for last year. And as you'll recall, it takes quite a while, so I won't be able to give you a conclusion of this for many months, I suspect, but just so people are aware that there is going to be a process and there will be a rating for CCGs for last financial year. Obviously, being one of the multiple year outstanding CCGs, one of only 2, to have that to the level that we have, we are hoping and aiming to achieve another outstanding rating, and I will keep you up to speed with progress on that. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Idris. Got a couple of hands up. Sue, then Hesh.
Thanks. Idris, on the recovery of services, thinking about the backlogs, that might not be evenly spread across all of the trusts. Are the system going to work together to try and clear them in sort of priority order, even if that means people travelling a bit further to other trusts?
I have the pleasure, Sue, of being the Senior Responsible Officer for Elective and Diagnostics across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, so that falls well into my remit. So we have created an aggregate patient list, patient waiting list, across all the providers, and we can split that by specialty, by provider. We know that there are some historic differences in terms of the numbers of patients waiting, and some of those historic differences have been compounded, but we are working together as a system to ensure that people are treated in order of clinical priority and then in order of waiting times. It's going to be achieved over quite a long period of time, so we can't just stop all the procedures in one hospital and transfer all the patients from another, many miles away. It's not quite that straightforward. I wish it were, make my job a little bit easier. But we're certainly working as a system to ensure that we have that equity of access. We're also now analysing the waiting list in terms of lower super output areas, so an indication of deprivation, and on ethnic origin as well, really to try to get to the bottom of whether there are any health inequalities with regard to waiting times, both clinical priority and lengths of wait. So we can address those as well. So it's not just between the providers, we're actually looking at it from a population health perspective as well.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Thanks. Heshen.
Thank you. Thank you, Idris. In relation to funding, I'm sure all of us are grateful for the additional funding to support the recovery process. With your kind of regional role, has that funding been mapped to any additional workforce requirements, i.e. does the existing workforce either have additional capacity that could be matched to the funding to be able to deliver it, or are we talking about additional staff, additional workforce being brought in?
Well, you're right to highlight workforce, Heshen, because it's one of the most significant challenges, and the way that the bids and the proposals being built up is from the bottom up. So the providers have looked at what it would take for them to be able to increase their activity. So sometimes that's sort of direct clinical inputs, sometimes it's sort of associated support people to help with patient flow and contacting patients and managing the processes, for example. But it is a really quite a wide range of things that have been put into that investment, ranging from additional equipment. So, for example, the number of theatre trays that we have for certain procedures, so you can carry out, sort of a three list day without running out of theatre trays and prostheses, for example. So it ranges from that to more equipment, some minor capital investment, and as well staffing. I think the challenge for us will be finding the staff to employ. There are shortages across the board, really, across the specialties. We are looking at some insourcing as well. So staff from other organisations, including the independent sector, potentially carrying out procedures in NHS facilities. There's a limited number of organisations that can offer that, but where they can, we're looking at that as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hession. Thank you, Idris. Moving on, Nicola, quality and patient safety update.
Yes, so key highlights from the meeting. One of the positive aspects we discussed was the ERS medical CQC report. They're our most recently procured transport provider, so they provide all transport for patients to appointments and for discharge. And it was really positive to see them doing so well when the previous provider had not had such a great CQC report, and they're really engaging with us around quality, and we attend their quality meetings. So the link's there if anybody wants to have a read of something positive. The care home work is continuing, and we're now working, trying to get back to some business as usual. So a year ago we were meeting weekly with the care homes. We're now moving that to 6 weekly and moving the focus to much more education and support and how we move forward. So that's really positive. And we're also working on what our audit programme looks like. So we took a proposal to QAPS last week, and we're proposing an audit programme over the year. So traditionally we've been and visited one day, and that's been their assessment for their annual audit, unless obviously there's been quality concerns in between. But the process this year will be spread out through the year with a planned visit for all elderly care homes every quarter by one of the professionals. So we're trying to avoid duplication, and for LD homes 6 monthly there'll be a safe and well visit, which will follow up on information that we've requested. So we're doing it quite differently, and then obviously we'll evaluate it as we go along and at the end of the year. So that's really exciting, and I think we've got to look at how we use resources differently. Continuing healthcare, so we still continue to achieve the 28-day target. And we're still working in the national discharge to assess pathway with the additional funding for Q1 and Q2, which is for which means that patients will be funded for a full 6 weeks up to Q1 if required, and 4 weeks in Q2. And obviously then that'll be assessed what happens then and whether things just return to normal. What has become evident over the last couple of weeks is that there are quite a lot of reviews in the system that are outstanding. So we've probably got about 177 reviews that are outstanding, ranging from 1 day to about 300 days. So I have spoken with Notts Healthcare Trust and Heather in my team to ask them to do a recovery plan and to look at how we can quickly get those reviews sorted out. Some of that has been related to, obviously there was a backlog of reviews that we had to do before March this year, and also they had some staffing issues which are now resolved. And I've also taken it to the contract exec board on Thursday, so that we can formally note that position with Notts Healthcare Trust. I have given them some warning that it's on the board so that they can come prepared for what they want to do and how they want to achieve that. The difficulty is it might be 177 last week, but obviously as the weeks move on, reviews get completed, so the number is movable and probably is less than that. But at the time when we assessed and looked, that was at a point in time. So obviously we're continuing to work with that. Personal health budgets go from strength to strength, and we continue to meet targets. And we have a really broad range now of personal health budgets, ranging from care packages to more complex neuro rehab and more specialist neuro services for individuals. So I think that's really positive, and probably quite different to what some other CCGs are doing around personal health budgets. And then finally, on a positive note, we've just got a summary of the safeguarding and prevent training that we're required to do as a CCG, and this year we've done really well, and Kathy hasn't had to chase people, and there were only 2 staff members who hadn't completed all 3, and that includes governing body. So I think you can give yourselves a pat on the back this year. The other thing I just want to mention, because I didn't know if Idris had put it in his paper, but we did have another major incident that was outside of COVID about 3 weeks ago, where Doncaster Royal Infirmary had to evacuate their women's unit, which included maternity, neonates, gynecology and paediatrics. There was some quite intense support across the system while that was managed, and they have now moved back into that accommodation. However, with some restrictions around what the criteria for births that they can take. They've got some reduced paediatric capacity and reduced neonatal capacity. But generally, the incident was managed really, really well, and does demonstrate how quickly a unit like that could be evacuated with some very small babies and some very complex babies, and obviously labouring women. And we got support both from the SYB system and also into Nottinghamshire, so Sherwood Forest, Lincoln and Chesterfield supported women that were labouring or required obstetric services. So I just wanted to mention that, and again just congratulate the trust on that. Hesh.
Thank you. Just a quick question about care homes, if that's all right. We had a fantastic presentation by a dietitian at GP Forum recently, and one of the things that popped up was hydration and nutrition in care homes, and the process that care home staff follow either prior to or at the point of triggering a dietitian assessment. And one thing that cropped up was whether there is an audit process to see whether they're adhering to the hydration nutrition toolkit. I certainly, when I was looking after care homes, had come across fluid charts, but the completion was inconsistent. I've not really come across a coherent nutrition chart as far as I can recall. So I was wondering whether we still have access to the BQIP, whether hydration and nutrition is part of the BQIP, or if it's not, whether it could be part of the audit process for care homes going into the future to try and enhance the health of care home residents.
Yeah, I think, Ash, obviously we do look at care plans as part of those quality visits, and obviously looking at fluid charts and dietetic charts is something we would look at. And I think we need to relaunch our nutrition and dehydration toolkit, because obviously we launched it just prior to COVID, and then I think the world was overtaken with PPE and everything else. So I think what Rachel's planning to do is at the next care home forum, which would be in 6 weeks, to do something around re-establishing that piece of work. The other work, from an IPC point of view, obviously BQIT's still continuing, but certainly nationally now there's a focus back around sepsis, AMR and all those things which do relate, and E. coli, which do relate to hydration particularly. So I think we will see things start to improve, but yeah, we do certainly look at those charts and feedback. Some of the systems, No Clumber Court's electronic system actually totals up daily what people have had and flags to them if they've not had adequate fluids. So that's easier for them, but obviously when you're using paper charts, it relies on somebody going and having a proper look and seeing what they've had, and that is the bane of my life, is what people add up at the end of the day on their fluid charts, and it's something I've often flagged. So yeah, it's still important.
Could we do it as a structured audit and do it for all care homes rather than waiting for the care home visits and then doing a kind of review of the patients that you see? Could we do it as a kind of overarching review of all care homes?
I think we will be doing it. I don't think at the minute, Hesh, that they'd be in any position to do any audit work, because they're just trying to re-implement, obviously, the visiting guidelines that were issued yesterday. So, and they are quite challenging. So what we'll do is we'll incorporate that into work later in the year and look at how they can do that in a more structured fashion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Any other questions for Nicola? No. Okay. Thank you. Next, quality and patient safety terms of reference.
It's me.
We've got you down for this, Sam, and it's for
It's me,
ratification.
Eric. It should be me.
Oh, sorry, Sue. Sorry.
It's all right. No, that's what it says on the thing. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it's just the updated terms of reference. There's no material changes, and it was reviewed in detail at QAPS and approved. So it's really just here for ratification or any questions that people might have.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Nope. And are people happy to ratify? I will take hands down as happy and hands up as unhappy. Have you changed your mind, Kumar?
Is there a home care forum? Sorry, it could be my ignorance. I know there's a care home forum.
Yeah, there's a home care forum on the list. Incident management forum, post-infection review meeting, care home forum, home care forum.
Right. Okay. So, well, it's there. So it's certainly a forum exists. I was not aware of it. I just wanted to. I was not sitting in the quality and patient safety. So apologies, Nicola, if this is such an ignorant question. But I know care home forum. But if there is a home care forum, then that's fine.
It's on the list, Kumar. Okay. Okay. Duly ratified.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Tingle.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so I'm first going to take you through the paper at the end of March, where we've currently landed. So I'll just take you very briefly through the paper, pull out all the main points, and obviously answer any questions that you may have. So we've got the final outturn for 2021. It is at this point unaudited, so that process is currently happening. And as you see in the paper, the first table you can see is all green. So we've met unaudited, we've met all the key statutory duties. So we've remained within our allocation. That's break even. We have delivered a surplus. I'll go into that in a minute. We've delivered a surplus of 429,000. We've stayed within the running costs allocation. We've got slight slippage against that. I'll talk about that in a minute because there is a slight amendment to it as well. And we've also worked within our cash limit. And as I've been telling you all year, and no doubt, you know, through various different meetings, you'll all know that we've been in this temporary financial regime all year. We've not had our regular allocation, and therefore we've been given an allocation which has been calculated nationally for us. We've also had top-up funds, and we've also had COVID funds as part of this financial regime, and there is a split further down in the report. So going straight into the £429,000 surplus, which again is subject to audit. I'm hoping it won't change, but it may change marginally as audit come in and do their work. NHS England have confirmed that the running cost target should be measured against the original allocation, what we would have got if we wouldn't have had this temporary financial regime. And it would have taken into account of the funded pension increase that we had probably about 18 months ago, something like that. So if we would have had a normal financial environment, we would have had a £196,000 underspend on running costs. We didn't because of obviously the financial regime, but it just gives you some context where we are in terms of our running costs in total. So we have still got some flexibility, I guess. And I guess the 429,000 that we are showing as a surplus, there is, you know, there's a legitimate explanation in terms of why we've actually delivered a surplus. So we've had funding received for prescribing in the early months of the year.
and there was always the chance of clawback of that money from NHS England, and CCGs did have it clawed back. However, and therefore I think we were prudent in terms of declaring that quite early. But because of the materiality in terms of the amount for us for prescribing, they chose not to do that. So that remained as a surplus position. So other CCGs, certainly within SYB, did have the clawback. And we also had some duplicate funding, and this related to most CCGs. So funding that was already contained within block contract agreements, but also funding that then passed through to CCGs again. And I just think that reflected the complexity of the arrangements that we had during last year, and obviously there was some anomalies. There is further detail in the paper around the COVID breakdown, so I'm not going to go into that unless anybody's got questions. But what I do want to draw your attention to is we did make some additional investment towards the end of the year in terms of additional investment. What we tried as much as we possibly could, when we realised we'd got a little bit of slippage towards the year end, we wanted to essentially put ourselves in the best position we possibly could. It was fairly limited, but we wanted to work with the Acute Trust to see if there was anything that we could do to catch up on some elective activity. As I say, it was fairly limited, but at least it was, it was in the right direction. The Mental Health Investment Standard. Again, subject to audit, but we are showing that we've actually achieved that in terms of what we've done this year. Cash, again, one of our statutory targets. We've ended up with £58,000 in the cash book at the end of March, so we're well within our target, so that is really good news. And all the better payment practice codes are achieved in both value and number, in volume, so again, that's really positive. And just some details in terms of process, what's happening, and I'm sure Sue will fill you in. So we've got KPMG, the audit started on the 26th of April, and we are due to submit our our final accounts on the 15th of June. Audit committee will consider those on the 27th of May. And I'm going to pause there for questions. And I'm happy to answer anything contained within the paper. I realise it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of what I've reported.
Thanks, Hayley.
Thank you, Hayley. Just a quick question around the running cost flexibility that you've just highlighted. At the last STC, we were talking about programs of work, and we have a significant program of work for mental health. Yeah. And with mental health funding that we've allocated in terms of improving patient care, etc. I was wondering whether some of that could be used to purchase some mental health expertise to support that program of work, potentially to try and accelerate that. Do you think that might be a possibility? Again, I don't know whether it's a conversation with execs to have in the future, etc.
I think that's certainly a conversation that we should have at exec committee. I think there is some flexibility there. I'll go on to the financial plan in the next paper, which will probably just answer some of your questions around some of the risks and some of the mitigations. But I certainly think that should be a conversation that we should have.
Great, thank you. And my second question was a question around accuracy. I'm not quite sure whether I've misinterpreted it, but Appendix A of the paper talks about acute services NHS block. And there's a significant difference between plan and actual, and a variance of 0. Is that correct? So
I'll check that. I've not noticed that, but I will check that, Hesh, and come back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hesh. Any comments, Sue?
I would only add that we had the accounts workshop for the audit committee very shortly before the accounts were submitted, and both the draft accounts and the draft annual report were of a very high standard. We didn't identify any big questions or anything, and we're really impressed with the team's ability, both the governance team and the finance team, to pull them together and prepare them under very pressured circumstances, because they were also doing the financial planning at the same time. So really wanted to publicly record our thanks for the team and to commend them on the quality of the work that they've done. And the feedback on the audit to date, when I was speaking to Michelle last week, has been they're very positive. They've not highlighted anything, it's the audit looks like it's going well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. And yes, Hayley, can you pass on Governing Body's thanks and appreciation? Thank you.
I will do.
So now on to financial plans for April to September.
Yeah, so we're still in this very different financial regime. So we've just had 12 months of the financial regime, as I've just talked about. That then continues into 21-22. So what we've been asked to do is split the year down in two halves again. So it's now classed as H1 and H2, which H1 is quite obviously the first 6 months, so April to September. H2 is the second 6 months. So for the purposes of this plan, we've been asked to submit H1, first 6 months. There are some nuances with that, in terms of we've been asked to plan for a full year of mental health investment standard. But I'll just go through very briefly the paper, and then again, I'm really happy to answer any questions that it may pose. So the financial plan that we've submitted is very broadly in line with the last 6 months, the H2 of 2021, based on very, very similar principles. There are some differences because we have got growth, etc. So I'll go through them in a minute. So the draft plans we have submitted already. We submitted those on the 6th of May. And as Sue has already said, the timing, coincided with the accounts, has been a little bit problematic in making sure that actually we've kept everybody up to speed, because it's not particularly worked very well from a time perspective for us. So I think one of the things that I think we have been a little bit concerned about is taking governing body on that journey. However, we are due to submit the final submission on the 3rd of June. Again, it's a little bit problematic just because of the timing, because this is still a draft and there may be some slight changes to it. So just a little bit of detail in terms of where we've landed. So we've been given fixed financial allocations again for the first 6 months. Now, we haven't been told anything beyond 6 months. However, I think we are all expecting that this financial regime is going to continue certainly into the second half, but we don't know that for any certainty. We will see that as time progresses. We've been given allocation of growth, and that is for both programme and also for the delegated co-commissioning, i.e. the primary care contracts, the GP practices expenditure. We've also had a transfer back of funding relating to independent sector, and hopefully what you'll remember from the last financial regime, NHS England, NHSE and I essentially took over the independent sector contracts and the funding with it. So they are transferring that back to us. So those contracts now are within our remit again, and those contracts in the main are all agreed and signed. We've also had some service development funding, SDF, which has been removed from our baseline, and essentially, removed, which is already in our baseline in the fixed financial allocation. So that's been removed from us because it's already included somewhere else. We've also been given mental health investment standard funding. And all those changes, you'll find a breakdown in the paper, table 1, of all those different elements of funding, and that comes to 97,549,000. There are some other funding streams then that we've been given. And these primarily are system funding. So the funding has gone to the ICS through the host, which is Sheffield CCG, as they are not yet the statutory body. So there's been some system top up, and that's equated to 74.1 million. This is exactly the same as what happened last year, but it's a slightly different figure because it's got some growth added to it. So that has essentially now been allocated and distributed out to providers. And essentially this is to support the delivery of break even within the provider sector. So exactly the same basis of allocation during the last 6 months is proposed for the first 6 months of this year. So that doesn't, none of that impacts on CCGs. Then there is growth funding that's been given of £10.4 million, and that's been split 50-50 between providers and commissioners. So in terms of providers, the 50% split has been based on turnover, providers' turnover, and then the other 50%, which has been distributed to commissioners, is then based on weighted population. So they're the distribution methodologies, if you like. Then we've been given £74.6 million COVID funding allocation, and again very, very similar to last year, but with a growth uplift. So it all correlates to last year. It's slightly different in terms of how it's been distributed, and hopefully what you can recall from last year, the distribution of this funding, all CCGs were required to make a surplus position, and that surplus position was obviously very, very challenging and a little bit frustrating for CCGs. So therefore there was an agreement that although that surplus requirement would be top sliced from this funding, and that continues into 21-22. So although it's not contained within this paper, there is, I think it's 22.6 million across all SYB commissioners, which has been top sliced from that 75.6 million. But then the difference this time is there's been a top slice in terms of the infrastructure costs for the ICS, and also there's been a population health stroke inequalities business case that's been submitted around about £2 million, which has also been top sliced against this funding. And then the distribution of the remaining funding has then been in line with last year. So CCGs get an allocation of the COVID funding, very marginal, and then the remaining funding then goes to the providers. So then there are so they're the system funding routes. There are then some other distribution of funding. Some we've got, some we haven't got. So I'll take each one in turn. So we've got the hospital discharge programme, and this is changed slightly in 21-22, and I think it has as it's starting to be phased out in a managed way. So for the first quarter, it will continue like last year. So the first 6 weeks will be funded still, and we'll get access to that national pot of money. And then in the second quarter, that will then be reduced to 4 weeks. And obviously we'll be coordinating very closely with Nicola's team to see what the impact of that is for us. And I suppose the expectation is that that will then cease at the end of September. It may do, it may not do. We thought it would have ceased at the end of March, but quite obviously it wasn't appropriate to do that. So we'll see how that plays out. We've also got the acute elective recovery fund, and this is again system money. So the all systems will be paid for activity delivered against nationally set thresholds. So we'll see again how that plays out, and I know Idris is very, very closely linked into this. Service development funding, we have got some of it already included within our position, but there is still some being held back nationally until some more conditions are being met, and therefore it will be released. And last year, during the last 6 months of last year, certainly what we saw various different pots of money being released as the months progressed. So there'll be things like diabetes in there, there's a whole raft of things, and I can bring that to governing body back during as I can present it during the financial paper in terms of exactly what it is we're expecting to receive. Mental health spending review. So we've got some additional money in terms of mental health, which was announced by the Treasury to support the recovery. So again, that's being contained within our plan as well. And then finally, there's the additional roles reimbursement scheme, the ARS scheme. Now, we've got 60% already included in our baseline funding, and we're expecting roughly about another 40% to be available to us based on if we can demonstrate the spend. The percentages work out slightly different now because there's been some growth allocated. So I think we've probably got about 56% in our baseline, and we probably due then another 44% of funding. But that's kind of just the nuance with it, just in terms of how the growth's affected it. But we're well on with that. So after taking all those things that I've just talked about into consideration, we've got a total allocation of 101,600,000. And what we've done as part of the team, certainly Michelle and Carolyn between them, have identified exactly what we need to look at in terms of spend. And so with that piece of work that's been done and all those income streams, we think that there's a slight gap, which will then mean that we've got an efficiency saving to achieve. And sorry, I've got some notes somewhere. So the efficiency gap is circa 900,000. So we're planning on spending 101,600, but that contains that efficiency standard. So there are some assumptions that have been made within our plan. I don't particularly intend to go down them all. I'll just pull out the main assumptions that we've got. So the investments are still very much limited to maintain services only and pre-commitments and the achievement of mental health investment standards. So it's only basically the stuff that we've been asked to do nationally that is contained within the spend. And I think for a governing body perspective, I think there is still a concern that it probably does impact on some of the business as usual type of work a CCG, will continue to do around transformational services, because the way the financial regime is working, it makes it very, very difficult to transform services. And what I mean by that is we've got all the NHS providers still on block contracts, and so they're again nationally determined. And it does mean that if we are wanted to transform services, pull services out of acute, look at community investment, look at primary care investment, the way the financial regime works for us, it makes it incredibly difficult. So that is just something to bear in mind. We've lived with it for the last year, and I think certainly that will still be very problematic going into this this financial year 21-22. And I think it's likely to continue. And we'll only know as we progress through the year whether we meet the efficiency savings and we've got any flexibility in terms of any additional funding we have. So other key assumptions we are planning on full achievement of the mental health investment standard. And as I've said, about the efficiency saving. So there is a table in the report which just sets how all the different categories of spend. So then just finally, there is some mitigations that we've put in to make governing body aware of. So we have got 0.5% of contingency set aside. We've been required to do that as part of the plan. We wasn't last year, but that is something that we've contained. That equates to about 500,000. So just bear that in mind as we're we're going through this report. There's obviously a risk in terms of the hospital discharge programme funding still being available, whether it exceeds the national pot. So we just need to be very mindful of that. We also need to be very mindful in terms of the growth in prescribing. We've assumed a level of growth in prescribing. We've assumed 4.5%. Other CCGs have assumed more than that, but we've based it on what we've previously experienced. So we based it on some trend. But as you all know, the way that we get the prescribing information to support the forecasts, it's always significantly delayed because of the amount of time it takes to collect and collate all the scripts. So by the time we know the financial position on prescribing, it's always well into the financial year. Certainly April's figures will not know until about July time. So that does cause us some problems in terms of, trying to forecast and if we're not on track, do something about it. We've obviously got the risks on continuing healthcare. That's always there. It always continues, but I just think it's it's helpful just to note that. Quite obviously, there is significant challenges for our ability to deliver efficiency savings, particularly in this financial climate, in terms of the regime that we're faced with. As I've already said, the NHS providers are on block, so therefore it makes it near on impossible to make any savings out of those particular costs. So that then just leaves the prescribing, the CHC of areas that we look to. And then I suppose it'd be remiss if we didn't mention that we've also got impact of other pressures on the ICS. So, we are a system and we are financially monitored as a system. So if any of the other 11 organisations in the ICS do struggle, we will be part of coming up with some kind of solution. So then just finally, as I've already said, we've got the mitigations, which is the contingency. So that will play into where we are. Now, one thing with this financial regime that is a positive and is a bonus to us is we because the NHS providers are on block contracts, it does take out the financial instability in terms of those elements. And those of you who've been part of governing body for some time will always know one of the big risks going into the financial year is always the cost per case nature of the acute contract. We don't have that anymore, so at least we've got that. But I've already said the cost per case nature of prescribing CHC will be the ones where we have the risks. So I think that's all I want to say on that. Really happy to answer any questions before I am back to Eric for the recommendations.
Okay, thanks, Hayley. Can I just ask one question? Do we still have any money lodged with the Bank of the NHS?
Yes, the drawdown is still there, and we will have that. it's not available to us, but it's always noted that it's still there. And I think, Eric, it is a really good point, because if and when we get to a situation in the ICS whereby we don't balance, that is then the questions that we then essentially we go down that route.
Well, I was more thinking this is potentially our last year as a CCG, Hayley, and actually what I want to ensure as chair of Bassetlaw CCG is that we utilise every penny we can for the benefit of Bassetlaw residents. And actually, if we've got $1.5 million or whatever lodged still with the NHS, actually, I would at some point like to actually use that for the people of Bassetlaw.
And you're absolutely right. And I think what the CFOs are trying to do now is they're trying to come up with a transition plan in terms of closing down CCGs and then transitioning into an ICS. And there are lots of things like that we need to consider. And I think it's probably an offline conversation that we have in terms of how we then approach this from a Bassetlaw perspective. But you're absolutely right.
Thanks, Hayley. Any other questions or points for Hayley after her excellent presentation? Sue?
Thanks, Hayley. I think that was really well explained, and it shows exactly where we are for the current period and how little flexibility we actually have as a CCG. There's very little that we can actually influence. And I suppose it was linked to that in terms of the efficiency savings that we're still required to make. There's very little scope for dealing with that now.
Yeah. And
CHC and prescribing are areas that we've done an awful lot on over the last few years. And I suppose my concern is that that's not a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
And there are things that we need to spend that money on. So really how realistic it is that those savings are achievable may be possible in the short term, but I think I would have concerns looking forward that if the efficiencies is something that's going to have to be radically looked at going forward as to how we can do anything or influence it.
Yeah.
But really think, I think this is a really clear report and shows where we are.
Thanks.
In a prudent light.
Thanks, Sue. Nicola?
Yeah, I think just on the back of what Sue said, I think there isn't anything major to get out of CHC or Section 117. Now we really have made as many efficiencies as we can. I think it would be luck rather than anything else if we were able to make some radical savings. I suppose the only light at the end of the tunnel is that definitely one of our Mitford patients will be stepping down soon. So within the next month or so, we're hoping, and it's looking as though that's going to plan. And I've had confirmation that our second Mitford patient has been accepted for the placement that they're looking at for that individual. So again, with no time scales on that, but so the second one may happen in the year as well, which I think will save us some money as well, Hayley. But equally, people fill those beds and somebody else comes from somewhere else into our ATC, and we have got 5 people in the ATCs across Nottinghamshire and Mitford.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicola. Idris, then Hessian.
I think it's important to recognise as well that we talked about the limitations of achieving efficiency savings this financial year. However, the importance of keeping on top of the expenditure so we don't actually start going south on this, sort of is critical. So from a continuing healthcare point of view and a prescribing point of view, we need to continue doing the work in order to contain the expenditure, and that's just as important now, because if that expenditure starts to increase, then we don't have the capacity and the flexibility because of the restrictions that we've discussed. So we need to maintain the same level of efficiency, the same level of oversight, and the continued work in those areas.
Thanks, Idris. We definitely want to avoid going south if we can. Hessian.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Hayley. I was pleased when you said you're building in a 4% growth into prescribing, because if you look at the actual cost last year compared to the year before, the growth has been about 3.8% or something along the lines of that. So that's helpful. I still think there is potential within prescribing for efficiencies. Our main focus is around deprescribing, which becomes a challenge when we don't have the opportunity to transform other services to be able to offer genuine alternatives to prescribing. So hence why my comment to Nicola around the care homes in terms of hydration and nutrition. You know, if you can tackle that, that'll have a knock-on impact in terms of how much medication somebody potentially need in terms of managing their kind of quality of life, etc. And the same thing with musculoskeletal conditions. If we had more access to alternative therapies, then patients wouldn't necessarily need to rely on opioids or analgesics, which then come with their own side effects, which then we have to then manage with additional medications, etc., etc. So there is potential, and our strategy for the last 2 years has been trying to encourage clinicians to think about deprescribing going into the future, which we've had significant challenge back, which we're working through for exactly the same reasons that I've just said, in terms of, you know, where are the viable, realistic alternatives to prescribing. If that's there, then we have a better chance. So I think it's kind of trying to kind of map those things together, really. So no, thank you very much for allowing that potential in terms of growth, and I think hopefully we should be able to maintain status quo in terms of prescribing. Thank you.
Thank you, Hessian. So Hayley, this is down to approve the plans. Is there anything else you need us to do other than approve?
So I guess just I made mention briefly in terms of the timing. So the timing doesn't quite work for us. So although I am not expecting, in fact, I'm not expecting any amendments, but there may be marginal amendments if we do get any queries back from the ICS. So I suppose what I'm asking governing body to do is delegate authority to the exec committee to approve if there are some minor changes to this plan.
Okay, are we happy with that, to delegate authority to the exec committee? So if we're happy, hands down. If we're unhappy, hands up. We are happy. Happy, Hayley.
Fantastic, thank you.
So thank you. Idris, performance.
Yes, thank you, Eric. I'll be brief, but I just wanted to highlight some key issues. Obviously, COVID's had a very significant impact on performance pretty much across the board, and we need to look at it in that context. But also, we've talked about recovery, and we are now looking to see sort of improvements as the incidence of COVID is reducing. Unfortunately, in some areas, like A&E activity, for example, that has meant that we've gone back up to pre-COVID levels, a very busy A&E department, despite all of the hard work of primary care. We are better than most in terms of 4-hour performance, despite that. So about 90% year to date, as opposed to 82.4 at the region. We continue to try and work on people not going to A&E if they haven't got an accident or an emergency. It's always been sort of a very challenging position, that, but we will continue with that work. In terms of 18-week performance, I touched on this earlier in terms of us being part of an accelerator system now. 68% of patients are being seen still within 18 weeks. The patients that are in the highest clinical priority are the ones that are being prioritised and seen most. But we've got just short of 360 patients now from Bassetlaw waiting over a year for treatment. They're particularly in orthopaedics and general surgery, some of the specialties like urology and ENT. The majority being in in orthopaedics. That is a reducing number, so that is a positive, but obviously it is still far, far higher than we would like to see, and we would like to get that back down to 0, but it is going to take some time to achieve that. If we look at diagnostics, there's quite a range of challenges around diagnostics. About 68% of people are still being seen within 6 weeks, but there's detail in the performance report in terms of the modalities that are most affected by sort of COVID in particular. Cancer performance is overall very good. 62-day wait, a number of breaches, 9 breaches there from referral to first treatment. So getting below 70% of patients being, they're having their treatment commenced within 62 days, which is disappointing. And we're working with Doncaster Bassetlaw hospitals to see how that can be improved. But as you'll gather from the report, it's not a single specialty or a single problem. It's small numbers, but across a range of different tumour groups. The IAP performance needs updating, and we've noted that, but it has been consistently positive performance, both pre and through COVID, and we will expect to see that continued. Last thing I just wanted to highlight, and this is partly as a result of all of the PPE, social distancing, and a greater awareness in terms of infection, is that the infection rates for MRSA and E. coli are 0. So really, really positive in terms of low infection rates. So we talk about the things that we want to take as lessons learned from the COVID experience. I think that would be one of them. So happy to take any sort of questions or further comments from people. Heshen.
Thank you, Idris. Just again, a couple of questions really. In terms of the cancer standards in particular, it seems that we are underperforming against the 62-day standard, but performing relatively okay against the 31-day first treatment and 31-day subsequent treatment. Does that imply that it's the delays at the point of referral and then confirming the diagnosis, the diagnostic element of it is probably what's causing that delay, or is it something else that has happened?
I think it's a number of factors, to be honest, Heshen. Some compound others. So like you say, there are delays in the diagnostics. You can see that in the 6-week performance. Yeah. Where that knocks on, they don't breach the 62 days because of that, but it makes it more challenging for the first treatment to actually start within 62 days because you've already eaten up, sort of a large proportion of the 62 days before you get to that point. Yeah. But in other areas, it's the treatment itself that's struggling to commence, particularly where that is for surgery. Okay. And as I mentioned, it's 9 breaches. We deal with small numbers, sort of here, so the percentage figures look sort of quite dramatically different. But those 9 breaches are over quite a range of different specialties. So I think it's just the challenge of trying to get everybody through every specialty, through every stage of that pathway. And it is falling down for a number of different reasons, as I said.
And my final question was around the corporate improvement plan that the Trust are undertaking at the moment to try and improve their recovery. We did touch upon this at Service Delivery Committee. I'm sure Kumar may have some additional points to make, but we did look at cancer outcomes and late diagnosis in terms of cancer, so which is probably far more relevant in this context. So the more delay, the later the diagnosis, the poorer the prognosis, etc. And the 2 areas that was flagged up on that was lung and lower GI. And I suppose my question is that the Trust recovery plan and the improvement plan doesn't seem to have a natural synergy in terms of the outcomes. And I suspect there's practical reasons as to why that's not the case, because of workforce, delivery, access to diagnostics, etc., etc. But going into the future, if you truly want to address health inequalities, I wonder whether there should be a triangulation between between what we as commissioners are seeing as a significant need, i.e. late diagnosis and poorer outcomes, with the trust mapping that to extra capacity to be able to address that.
I think it's an excellent point, Heshen. The Cancer Alliance are doing quite a bit of work on looking at the impact on outcomes and where that is being sort of disproportionately felt as well, whether it be by geography, socioeconomic group, ethnic minorities and so on. And it's one of the things that they found, for example, is that the presentations of people to primary care differs quite considerably. And although I lauded earlier the fact that there are a number of referrals under the 2-week waits is back up to what it was pre-COVID, which is positive as well, because our referral rates under the 2-week waits were probably below where they should have been in previous years, and we'd increased that. So we've gone back to the increased number. Actually, it's not evenly spread. And if you look at it across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, there are some areas that are significantly below recovering the number of referrals to 2-week waits. So for a range of reasons, but more related to a population health perspective on it, that is being looked at as a system. And you're quite right then. You've got to then triangulate that back to the actions that secondary care as well take.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nicola?
Yeah, and I suppose in relation to harm reviews, the trust are looking at people that have been on a prolonged pathway and doing an assessment of whether there has been clinical harm, and that goes through the Doncaster and Bassetlaw quality meeting, which Andrew and Kathy attend on our behalf. And we did discuss this a bit at QAPS last week around clinical harm, and what we're not getting any feedback from that group directly is whether any of them were Bassetlaw patients that there are any concerns about. So Andrew and Kathy were taking that back last week. But on the back of that, we've asked Lee Adele to come to the June meeting to give us an overview of cancer and where there's potential harms or patient safety concerns that are being identified through any of the forums that she sits on or that she's aware of, because obviously we need to be noting that in that forum.
Thanks, Nicola. Kumar?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Nicola, I think I regularly attend, and there is a recovery plan through Cancer Alliance, and we are looking into that practice specific. I mean, I think it's nice to see that 2-week referral goes up, but as far as I'm concerned, there is a big variation not only between ICS but between practices within Bassetlaw too. So we are delving in, perhaps the governing body may not know this, but we are delving in and trying to get information and trying to have conversation with the practice, how to make it better. And I think this is partly reflection from what Heshen raised. It is, in terms of 2-week wait, it is not the clinicians who change the threshold. I think every clinician keeps the same threshold of referral. However, the more patient you see, the more you refer. I think that's what, on looking into the data, it transpires. So it is a big piece of work we have to do, and hopefully we have better outcome specifically for bowel cancer. When I looked into the bowel cancer outcome, Bassetlaw is the worst, and compared to all the CCGs. So I want to really focus on bowel cancer this year, and then piggyback on Doncaster's project on early lung cancer diagnosis, because there is a national work done on CT scan and picking up. So these are the two things I'm focusing on this year. But obviously I've not shared here. Perhaps it's time for clinicians to make a comment on it too here. But more paper will go to STC. Further paper go to STC to discuss further. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kumar, and thanks, Idris. Communication update, Sam.
Just a few notes, I think reiterating what's already been said around reminding people where the best place for treatment is, understanding we've got pressure, as Idris said around returning to A&E, comms around COVID, as people have mentioned, and it was Mental Health Awareness Week last week. So again, Sarah was doing comms messages, promoting that. And just to thank Sarah for her input on the transitions leaflet that goes alongside the video, because much of that was her work. So thank you and acknowledging for that. And that's everything really, because I think it's just the comms has followed the flavour of the conversation we've had today.
Thanks, Sam, and yes, thanks, Sarah, for everything you do around the comms. Unknown to a lot of governing body members, that there's always quite a lot of work going on in the background. So Sarah, thanks for all your hard work there over the last 15, well, over the last X years, but specifically over the last 15 months around COVID. Moving on, Sue, Audit Committee update and Audit Committee work plan.
Thanks. I've already given you the update effectively in terms of the audit accounts workshop that we had before this last meeting. The work plans attached. The only change I would flag up is that you'll see that we have an update on efficiency plans coming to each meeting of the confidential. Following the discussion with Hayley that's outlined that the efficiency remit is relatively limited at the moment, what I've agreed with Victoria, who takes the lead on the efficiency side of things, is that will shift to being as needed, so that we're not spending or requiring Victoria and her team to spend time servicing the audit committee when they could be better spending their time on other things, particularly linked to the transition. But that when we need, and if we need an update, they will come along and give us that. So it's really just a change to what's noted there to an as needed for the efficiency update. But happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thanks very much, Sue. Any questions? Nope.
So happy. I will assume that's ratified then.
Yep, I can see no hands up, so let's ratify that before anyone changes their mind.
Thanks.
Thanks. Primary Care Committee update a few days before our next Primary Care Committee, Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, just to note, these are brief minutes from the 26th of March, so things have moved on a lot. So I'll not dwell on those, but just the key messages for meeting this week will be around incentive scheme discussion and agreeing an incentive scheme that is going to be good for primary care in terms of understanding the pressures that they're under this recovery year. Other things will be the vaccine, the continued rollout, echoing Eric's comments around business as usual in primary care, and also just to note there is a long COVID pathway, so it will be interesting to note if more people have accepted onto that pathway, because numbers were relatively low from the first outbreak. So that's everything to note, Eric.
Thanks, Sam. Any questions? Nope. And a few of us will look forward to seeing you for a Primary Care Committee on Friday, Sam. COVID and vaccination update, Idris.
Thanks, Eric. So largely good news. The vaccination programme now has been made available to people who are 36 plus. It's roughly speaking going down 2 years every week, and that does then put us in on track to seeing all adults by July or during July. Having said that, the vaccine supply is still not as great as we have got capacity for, I'll put it that way. So we could do more, but obviously vaccine supply is being targeted in particular areas, and hopefully will improve in the coming weeks. one policy change that has been made is that the 12-week gap between the first and second dose has now been sort of reduced to 8 weeks. So people will be, in many cases, changing their appointment schedule. Where people booked online, they will already have a date 12 weeks after their first. So nationally, they're looking at the system to be able to give the capacity to bring that forward. In Bassetlaw, over 70% of the adult population, over 70,000 people, have now received their first dose. And across South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, the figure is over 1 million first doses being provided, which is a fantastic achievement. Nearly half of the adult population in Bassetlaw have already had their second dose. And so you can see the figures that we were achieving, sort of 8 to 12 weeks ago, have helped us get to that point. If you look at the proportion of people who are actually directly eligible for the vaccine, well over 90% of people in the eligible cohorts have had the vaccine, which means that although in some cases the younger age groups have been a little bit slower to get out there, they are coming forward, and we're seeing those uptake of the vaccine sort of right across the board, which is really encouraging, because there were concerns that the sort of 97 plus vaccination rates of the older age groups may fall off a bit, but a little bit less, but actually being achieved really well. And I think much of that is due to the persistence of the primary care networks in contacting people and recontacting them and bringing them forward, in addition to the fact that there are greater choices now. And I suspect that the younger age groups are also taking up the vaccination centres outside of Bassetlaw to a greater extent than the older age groups. And the most recent sort of alternative to obtaining a vaccine is that Wellfield Pharmacy have introduced a vaccination opportunity at Gringley Hill, on the Hill Community Centre. So that's just another way that people, particularly in that area, could obtain the vaccine. In terms of COVID incidence itself, at this point, we have around about 1% of the beds across the region have got COVID positive patients in. And in South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, we're into a few dozen patients across the whole of the system, and only 4 on intensive care at this point in time. So very low numbers compared to where we have been. The so-called Indian variant, B1617.2, is becoming more widespread in the country. So that is obviously an area of concern, but all of the evidence that we have so far suggests that the vaccine is effective against that variant of concern, which is really good news. But of course, it does spread very, very rapidly, and so those cohorts or those individuals who haven't had the vaccine are more at risk, particularly in those areas. And we've heard about in the northwest, but it's not limited to that. Obviously, London has had some sort of worrying numbers, as have a number of other areas. So very low numbers, many of whom can be tied back to travel from India recently, but certainly not all. So I think that variant is going to become sort of more widespread. If anything, that should encourage even more people to come forward and get the vaccine, because that is the best defence. As restrictions loosen, the Indian variant, so-called, becomes a greater concern just because of its ability to infect people. So we will be keeping a close eye nationally and locally on any increase in